Orientalism, in plain terms, can be defined as the discourse of the West, the understanding of the West about the East. Now, if you perceive something, if you look at something that is inferior to you, you pass a judgment, okay? And that judgment will obviously be self validating, where you will try to put yourself on a pedestal and the other will be showcased as marginalized. Same goes with the case here. The Western countries wanted to categorically marginalize the Eastern countries, and this entire theory of where they try to justify their means, where they try to justify their exploitation, their imperialistic style, is called Orientalism. The work Orientalism is, of course, a milestone in the history of colonial discourse. The book Orientalism consists of three long chapters, and each of these chapters are further divided into four units each. All right. The book begins with the introduction, where Said has tried to make us understand the meaning of the term Orientalism. In the introduction itself, Edward Said has very clearly defined Orientalism. He writes that Orientalism is actually corporate institution. Okay, it's a formal way of dealing with the Orients. Okay, it's a corporate institution for dealing with the Orients. Now, how do the Westerns deal with the Orients? By making statements about it, describing it, by teaching it as if they are preaching them, and settling it, and finally ruling it. And the introduction of the book claims that Western portrayal of the East is a way of justifying the years of colonization. Chapter 1 of the book is called The Scope of Orientalism. Now, here, Said has written about how Western dominating countries, they have created an imaginary geography of the East and tried to prove why that geographical condition is inferior, therefore re-establishing their idea to rule over the East. So everything, even the land, their culture, their society, everything is inferior, and therefore they must be taught, they must be preached, they corrected, they must be ruled over. Okay, this is the way of justifying their colonial exploitation. All right, so Orientalism is the way in which the Western countries put forward their views, put forward the views in the guise of facts. Okay, but Said clearly claims that the Western image or the Western understanding of the Orients, that is Orientalism, had very little to do with the real Orients, with the real Asian people, because all this was imaginary, okay, not real. All this was fabricated. Going more deeper, Said says that Orientalism is not actually only a collection of misinterpretations about the Orients or the Asian people. Rather, this system, Orientalism, has created a body of systems, a body of theories, a body of ideas, practices, which for many generations there has been a considerable material investment. Okay, a lot of investment, a lot of mind game has gone into creating the theory of Orientalism by the West. What does material investment mean? It is very important. It implies all the processes of academic field, including scholarships, academic readings, books, art, literature, political writing. And in this way, Orientalism in the European culture, it became an instrument for maintaining content. Okay, this term content, you can investigate more about it. It's a term given by Gramaski. And Said asserts that there is no pure knowledge. The knowledge about the East is not pure, it is not real. Rather, all of it is shaped by years of ideological positions and constructions. So Said in his book has described that with the start of European colonization, the Europeans, they came in contact with the Orients or the lesser developed people and the lesser developed countries of the East. They found their civilization and culture very exotic, all right, and established the science of Orientalism, which was the study of the Orientals, all right. Therefore, one can say, and of course, Said has written this, that Orientalism is merely a false construction of Western representation, is a false theory of Western representation about the East by a section of prejudiced people. And therefore, of course, this book came as an eye opener, whereby people understood that the knowledge about the non Europeans was a part of the process of domination or colonization. You know, the Europeans, they opened up bundles of lies as they had a strong dislike against these Easterns or the Orients. Therefore, Said in his book, he has mocked the Western representation of the East in the literature as well. Okay. Example, Richard Burton's translation of the Arabian Nights The Rubaiyat and the Kama Sutra were translated into English, but these translations were not honest, as these translations, they indirectly tried to belittle the Orients. Okay, so these translations cannot be considered as authentic. Their sole purpose was to belittle the Asian people and their cultures. Moving to chapter 2 of the book, it is called Oriental Structures and Restructures. Here in chapter 2, Said has pointed towards a slight change in the attitude of the Europeans towards the Orientals. How this came about? Actually, Oriental land was now, and including the behavior of the Orientals, was highly romanticized by the European poets and the writers. Okay, so these writers basically presented the Easterns and their lifestyle in a romanticized way to the Westerners. All right. So now the East was perceived by the Western people as a place of pure human culture, where culture perceives and where culture flourishes. Okay. Actually, no necessary evil in the society. Okay. They have their separate culture, but it is not supplemented by any evil element. And since they are budding culture, and every fresh, every nuanced, innocent culture needs a fatherly figure to guide them. So now these Orients, according to the Western countries, they needed a fatherly support. They needed a fatherly role to assist them. And who, of course, is going to assist them? The West, of course. Now, coming to the second justification that the West, that the Europeans gave to colonization or the science of Orientalism, was that they were meant to rule the Orients. Why? Because the Westerns, they have developed sooner than the Orients as a nation, of course, which shows that, which further implies that they were biologically superior to the Orients. Okay, so these two justifications were given by them in order to rule the Orients. Quote unquote, they cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. Moving on to the last chapter 3, it is called Orientalism Now. This chapter deals with the evolution of Orientalism in the 20th century, or in the modern era, we can say, and how after World War I, actually many of the Western countries, they settled themselves. Okay, they toned down a bit in their idea of Orientalism. They tried to adapt to the new demands, to the understanding of the Orients as well. They try to understand or partly understand their idea of freedom or their demand for freedom and independence, while still sticking to the core concept of Orientalism, that is, both are different, one is superior, the other is inferior. This obviously had this in at the back of their mind, but they also showed a willingness to move forward, to give them their own space and freedom. Okay, so they stuck to the evident difference that existed between the two cultures, but they also extended their helping hand towards the growth of these Orients. Okay, and the book, of course, concludes by the famous statement that the subaltern must speak for itself. The subalterns, the marginalized, they must stand for themselves. I would also like to conclude my lecture with the fact that Orientalism is actually is merely an output of European imperialism. To understand Orientalism, you can study more about Edward Said, how he disliked the, profound bent towards deconstructive criticism. Rather, he was drawn more towards a Marxist and a Foucauldian analysis of literature and culture. Thank you.